Habari gani, karibuni, asanteni kwa kuwa nasi. I need to figure out how to stop that music at a better place. That felt very abrupt. So I need to go back to the drawing board on that. Welcome and thank you for joining us. The name is Nduku Mulumba, again, a fellow co-host with my brother Allimadi, countering the false narrative that the West has perpetrated and propagated against Africa and Africans for centuries, and telling our African story from an African perspective. Brother Allimadi.
Yes, karibuni from wherever you're tuning in globally. Karibu to our weekly chuo kikuu. Chuo kikuu, of course, is a Kiswahili word for university, our open university. And today we're going to tackle an issue that is hardly tackled on the African continent, and that's the issue of class segmentation, and class struggle. And we have an excellent guest to speak with us on that topic.
Mm-hmm. We are happy to be joined by our brother Kambale Musavuli, originally from the Congo. But we will let him introduce himself now and tell us a little bit about himself before we start the conversation. Brother Musavuli.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be on. Humbling, whenever you're asking me to introduce myself, I don't know where to start, right? As you say, I was born in a country called the Congo. And then I became a refugee, moved to the United States. And through that experience as a refugee, if I should say, or an immigrant in the United States, I came to understand what it meant to be an African. Because growing up in the Congo, me saying I was an African was more the continent, right? Mm-hmm. But I saw myself as a Zairian, because Congo was Zaire before. And the way it became very clear, it was my interaction with people. People didn't see me as a Congolese, they saw me as an African. And the collective experience of Africans we could relate to, being in the United States. Yeah. So through that experience, I was able to find myself, principally because of the school I went to, North Carolina A&T State University, NHBCU in Greensboro, where some of my comrades there will ask me questions about where I was from. I will discuss with them the situation in the Congo, and they lend the support to the global movement to raise awareness around the situation. And I joined Friends of the Congo in 2006 as a volunteer. Then in 2008, I became the spokesperson. Worked with them up until 2018 as a spokesperson, and that experience allowed me to understand both sides of the continent. Specifically in the United States, understanding U.S. citizens, how they do not actually know what the government do abroad. So to explain them the importance of them holding the government accountable for the taxpayers' money, because their government took my dream away. And my dream in the Congo growing up was that I was going to graduate from high school in the Congo, go to the University of Kinshasa, study law, become a lawyer, and have life in DRC. Bill Clinton didn't think that was a dream that should be fulfilled. He backed Museveni of Uganda, Paul Kagame of Rwanda in the invasions of the Congo that have taken the lives of over 6 million people. So my experience from 2008 up until today has been to lift up the story of the Congolese people to the world. And then as I did that, I started understanding the central reason, the main reason why Congo is at the center of an African revolution, right? Or as no, many people would say it's rather the center, 9 bordering countries, whatever happens there affect the African continent. Kwame Nkrumah saw it as a centerpiece for the United States of Africa. Even when you read Fanon, toward an African revolution, I always tell people, if you don't have time to read the whole book, read the last paragraph. Let us be sure never to forget it, that the fate of us all is at stake in the Congo. And he was writing toward an African revolution in Algeria, right? Sharing the experience of the Algerians for self-determination, but still had an eye on the Congo. So that's been some of the work that I've done, mainly around the advocacy on the situation in the Congo. But I also engage with other Africans and other internationalists around the world to really understand what does it take for us to be free. And Nkrumah helped me a lot to understand it. Right? I think as we discuss, I'll merge my personal experience to coming to understand why there is no option for Africa but Pan-Africanism for liberation.
Absolutely.
Right? And how we must actually build it. If we don't do it, each country, as Nkrumah said, right, the independence of Ghana is meaningless if it's not tied to the liberation of the entire African continent. And that's true for every single nation. And Pan-Africanism is the way.
Right. If we don't build it, 50 years from now, there'll be another platform like this. And the 3 or 4 people will be talking about exactly the same thing that we're discussing today.
Exactly.
Yeah. So our conversation, thank you so much for that. As you were talking, I was like, okay, tell us more about the Congo. But we another day for that. Class struggle in Africa. As Allimadi said, it is a topic that is often not spoken of. It is a topic, it's almost like a taboo, right? You don't talk about it. It's not good manners to talk about it, but we will talk about it today because it's a problem that has festered in Africa. Let's start by you just giving us your view of what the class struggle in Africa looks like today. And as we talk about Africa, as you all know, on Kumbukeni, we talk about Africa beyond borders, right? Africa is wherever the African is. So we're talking Africa in the Caribbean, Africa in the United States, Africa in Europe, Africa wherever the African is. What is the class struggle?
Oh, it's a deep question to ask, right? But class struggle is everywhere. It's not just on the African continent, it's everywhere. But specifically, when we're speaking about the African continent, the challenge that we have even understanding what the class struggle is, the fight between the oppressed and those who are ruling us, the ruling class, is because we don't use those terms, right? We, in the Congo, we'll call them government officials, we'll call them politicians, right? We may call them chiefs, right? So there are different words that we will use that sometimes, because in our curriculum, right, the colonial curriculum, we did not study class. It was on purpose, right? They did not want us to understand what class is, because they left class as the colonizer. They created the class of those as they leave the continent, that they will continue to rule over the people. Right? So I always use an example of Congolese organizing in New York City during the Kabila regime. And it was fascinating. All of us were in the street, right? We all saying, Kabila must go. We must have a new change. There was no discussion about this person. I think the parents are actually in government. This person, they may be related to one of the Congolese billionaires, controlling Jekamin, and so on, right? So we all protested as Congolese, right? And then when the results came out, which did not reflect the will of the people, and the journalists are putting microphone in front of the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie is telling them there was a free and fair election in the DRC. And we are looking at each other. Wait a minute, this is the person who was protesting with us. As Lenin quoted, right? Lenin clearly stated that the petty bourgeoisie will ally with the masses, But at the end of it, right, in the final analysis, right, that bourgeoisie will always betray the masses.
Yeah.
And we've seen that over and over, that these elites in our country, the new bosses who replace the colonial masters, are continuing the oppression, are continuing the management of
The state.
the means of the states and other means of productions, while we are struggling. We are continuing to struggle to determine our own affairs there. So that's how I see class struggle. The challenge for the African masses to understand that class struggle is still happening is because they're not able to connect that the ruling class of the country, they are the oppressor, and we have to fight to regain control of our destiny.
Yeah. So before Allimadi, you go, just to give a quick background as to why this is an important topic, right? And why Africans are lost in everything. We focus on colonialism, imperialism, because that is the thing that is staring at us. And for those of us who end up in the diaspora, we learn about racism, right? For those who had the unfortunate existence of being born here because they were taken from their land, that is all they know, racism, right? So those are the main things that we are looking at when we think about our situation, why we are not getting the jobs, the schools we like, the neighborhoods we want to. Racism, capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism. But under that, and maybe a part of that, and maybe the cause of that, is classism, right? Because it took that higher class, the bourgeois, to come together and go to Berlin and say, we found a land, we want it, you get this piece, you get that piece, you get that piece. But they hid it in all this other stuff. And now in Africa, it is hidden in independence, right? We think that because we were so focused on racism, capitalism, and colonialism and imperialism, we're like, okay, now we are independent. We're involved in capitalism, but at least we're not colonized. But we forget that the class that was created by those classists is still existent. And in fact, as Nkrumah says in The Struggle Continues, in fact, as they were departing physically, but remaining very much so virtually, they instilled power structures that are very classist, that make sure they maintain that position of power. So just to give context to those who are listening, this is why we are deciding to attack class. Because again, Kumbukeni's goal is to decolonize our minds so that we can work on solutions. And if we don't identify the problems, we will not be able to work on solutions. Allimadi.
All right. So Ndugu Karibu, thank you again. And thanks for that. Connecting with the personal experience is always the best way to get people to relate to these issues, because these are not some esoteric issues that we discuss. These are things that impact human beings. So I'm glad you made that connection. So you've really pointed on a number of key issues. And I just want to, some of them may be like commentary, but they can invite your response too. I think part of the biggest problem we have, not in Africa, by the way, but globally, is that history is taught in such a way, this thing happened this century, that year, that thing happened, without really explaining adequately why it happened. So when we teach about enslavement of Africans, when we teach about colonization of Africa, as if these bad European people came and colonized us and became the ruling officials. And then at some point we won, so-called won independence, and they left. So the end of the story, right? We don't teach the way that, in fact, what both of you have said, Sister Nduku and you, is that they were building a global structure at every stage, whether it was enslavement, whether it was colonialism, and the modern iteration, which of course is neocolonialism. All along, they built the structure and the mindsets, the people, what role they would play in this global structure. So I think it would also help a lot if you outline it that way. And then to go back to the point that Sister Nduku said, that we focus on teaching on the racism and race, which of course is very important because it's one aspect that imperialism and capitalism uses to divide people, right? A part of the segmentation is based on race, and then it's based on ethnicity, religion, so-called tribe, so maybe you can touch on that as well. And then one reason why, of course, is also we don't teach class is because imperialism won't allow you to do that. I think they're not that uncomfortable if you say these European imperialists, the European colonialists. I think they're used to that and they know how to manage that. But when you start teaching class, and people start understanding that the so-called presidents we have are actually not our presidents, but they're just playing their role in fulfilling the hijacking of their wealth. Essentially, what they're doing is that it's tantamount to somebody coming to the United States, going to individual people's bank accounts, and siphoning the wealth to wherever they're taking it. Right? I think if people could see that that's exactly what's being done by those young people dying in those mines in the Congo and in West African countries, desperate, trying to earn, just something to keep them alive, while the real wealth is being taken to Europe and the United States, and of course to Asia now as well. So maybe it's not really a question, but I think you can find something to respond in terms of what I've presented. Thank you.
I like the way you brought up how we teach history. And the late Justice Henaku, he was the secretary of the Socialist Movement of Ghana, unfortunately passed away. And in some of the conversations that I had with him while I was in Accra, while he was alive, was really around that. He said that we can't be sentimental around slavery and think just, these evil people, they needed free labor. Right? And that's why the book Class Struggle in Africa is very important, and which actually has helped me a lot in understanding the challenges of Nkrumah. Right? Nkrumah was deposed when local sycophants were found to collaborate with the CIA. But those local sycophants, they're just saying this, right? That they were soldiers, right? Soldiers did a coup. But these soldiers wearing the military uniform have a class position in Ghana. They were chiefs, right? And it was almost, I'm extrapolating, but one could say it was a chief's coup against Nkrumah bringing a new republic.
Right. But
in history, they'll just say, these soldiers took over. And we see that over and over. I think not long ago, I met a customs official in Ghana, and we had to meet for some paperwork that I needed to do, but he wasn't available because he went to his village since he's the chief,
right? And
he has to go represent. So during the daytime, he's a customs official.
But he's getting paid still, right?
Exactly. Exactly, and he has so much power. Whatever he says in the community has weight, right? So, but to go back to Justice Henaku and the Class Struggle book, the way he really helped me understand the challenge of Nkrumah, he needs to build this country. And the system that existed, right, the Gold Coast, the way it was created, did not first allow for, I would say, ethnic collaboration. So he went to the north and he spoke to the people there. I said, hey, Gold Coast is a smaller country. Please join and we will become the greater Ghana. Like Nkrumah engineered Ghana as we see today, right? Because I always made a correction to people when people say that Ghana was the Gold Coast. No, it was not the Gold Coast.
Interesting.
Right? It was Ghana today is Gold Coast and other parts of the land. He himself single-handedly went to communities at the borders, adding territories, bringing people together. I said, this is what we are going to do. We're going to build a country where we will use the wealth of the country to develop. And not only that, to support others. But the idea didn't just come from his mind, right? It was a community project, if we must say, a community project rooted at the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, where Africans from many places, from the Caribbean, from the Americas, from the continental African continent, from Europe, sat down in Manchester saying, World War II is ending, yet we are still being colonized. They just fought each other and they killed over 6 million Jewish people in Europe. But at the end of it, they decide to take the land of Palestine, but they continue to keep us colonized. That does not make sense. So we must fight for our liberation. And not just the liberation of the African continent, but of African peoples wherever they are. And they created a plan, right? A plan of liberation that was independence now. And that independence now was to take control of the land and the resources to develop them for the benefit of the masses. A theoretical idea which was put in practice in the secretariat of that conference. Padmore was there, Nkrumah was there, and others. And from 1945 to 1957, we saw what African people can do when they come together. 45, they met. 1957, Ghana becomes independent. And who are his advisors? Not just Ghanaians, but internationalists and Pan-Africanists, right? Du Bois was an advisor to Kwame Nkrumah. Padmore was an advisor to Kwame Nkrumah, right? And others came because they understood the importance of the liberation of Ghana. But as they start engaging, people don't talk about how many coup attempts happened against Nkrumah, right? Even a bomb exploded at the stadium, right? Yes. But people don't talk about that. He was under so much attacks that the way he built the state was for the protection of what they were building, because he wasn't building it for Ghana. And we know that because he bailed out Guinea. When Guinea needed support, Ghana came to the rescue. When African liberation movement needed a place to meet, 1958, a year after he became president. 1958, he started implementing the All African People's idea that came around that we needed to come together, organizing the All African People's Conference in Accra. So all those things, by the time he left, not he left actually, against him, he had built over 700 factories. He had built roads in Ghana, right? That people today, like Ghana, the position Ghana is today is the position that Nkrumah put it, by showing concretely from the theory to practice that if you implement scientific socialism, right, not the theoretical, scientific one where you test it scientifically, it said this works, and you continue to implement it. You take your gold, you exploit it, you take the profit, you build the road, it works, you continue to do it, and so on and so forth. That it is possible. It was possible, and it is possible. And those who saw that the power was being taken away from the feudal system, the chief did not have the power that they had before, right? The people had power now, right? The clothing that Nkrumah has, that everyone wear now, represents something for the working class of Ghana, right? These were the merchants. The poor of Ghana wore that at times. When someone wore it, it was labeled, not labeled, but at least seen as a merchant, someone in the market and so on. But he took that clothing and wore it so that he could connect with the masses and say, now this is your power. Right? So we saw that it happened, and that was fought very hard. And we know we don't need slavery to build our African continent. We know that we can use scientific socialism, and we have an example in Ghana that it is possible and it can be impactful.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I'm looking forward to when we launch our book review channel of Kumbukeni to review that book, and maybe we'll bring you for that conversation. And that book I'm referring to is The Struggle Continues. Nkrumah points out the different projects he put up, and he points out what happened, the Brits, what they did, and it's interesting you're talking about this. So we'll go there now, since you mentioned it. This division of power, and the British intentionally did it. First of all, the British started. This is the thing I talk about when we all talk about non-violent, right? Non-violent movement. Non-violent movement has never done anything good for Africans. Never, ever, ever, ever in the history of man done anything good for. I mean, you will see it and see civil rights movement, that is good. No, when you look at the general picture, nothing good. Those are just band-aids on the wound. Why do I say that? I say that because Nkrumah's nonviolent movement, and he realizes this later, which is evident in his books, meant that he had to sit with the British, and the British had to say, this is the constitution you're going to have. And Nkrumah was like, nah, this doesn't work for us. And the Brits are like, do you want independence or not? And Nkrumah is like, okay, we really need them out of here, so let's accept it now, and then we're going to do a ninja attack on them next year, right? So he had to. That's what nonviolent movement does. You have to give in to some of their interests in order to get what you want, and it's always a losing negotiation on the part of the oppressed. So during that time, the British make sure that they organize Ghana in a way that they give, under the constitution, power to the chiefs, right, to the feudal system, and power to the government. This is playing out now when we hear about the loaning of Ghanaian artifacts to Ghana, right? Such a, even saying that out of my mouth, like I want to just bust out and laugh. A nice African laugh where you lean back and then come back and look at someone seriously and ask them, what did you smoke? But it's agreed upon by an African, a king, a so-called king. Ghana has a president, Akufo-Addo, who had nothing to do with this negotiation. And now it is, we're hearing it as something done for Ghana, but no, it's something done for the Ashanti Kingdom, not for Ghana, because Ghana was not a part in negotiating. So again, talking about this feudalism that is still in Africa, that was intentionally left there by the colonial system so that it can continue creating this instability in Africa. Allimadi, I don't know if you want to talk more about feudalism in Africa and how it's.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's one of the issues that Thomas Sankara had to tackle, and he did that knowing it would have immediate impact. And the fact that most of the traditional rulers had all this land which was not being used, but nobody could use it because they had to approve. So of course he intervened and he took away that power. He had a land reform program, and within 3 years, Burkina Faso was able to achieve food self-sufficiency. So obviously, I think it's important, the comrade, that you should touch on the aspects of some of these retrogressive feudal systems that still holds back the potential in many African countries. And I also wanted to make a comment on the coup against Nkrumah. There's a website at the State Department where they have their historical archives and records. And I think people can search it by going to State Department historical records. If you do Google, I think it will give you the link to that. So I was reading some of the memos and letters from the U.S. Embassy in Ghana to Washington, and some of the memos from the White House and from the State Department as well. And so one of President Johnson's advisors was saying, even the advisor was alarmed. He said, this general, Accra, I believe, right? Said in conversations, he came and he asked Johnson that why is the US playing around with Vietnam? Why don't they just use nuclear weapon and end this thing quickly? This is the mindset of the people who got rid of Nkrumah. So I just wanted to bring that out too. But go ahead in terms of the issue of feudalism, if you want to tackle that, Conrad.
Yeah, I mean, it is real to us even today. About 7 days ago, now 8 days, there was inauguration of the president of the Congo, Tshisekedi. And the process of him actually becoming president or saying that, no, hi, Tshisekedi will respect the constitution and so on, really scared me because it brought elements that I saw under Mobutu, right? And these elements reinforces the feudal system. We are living in a weird moment on the African continent, right? The feudal system is exactly, we cannot ignore it. And that's what Nkrumah is telling us too, that we cannot ignore the existence of it. But we must lay out the elements that are, corrosive to the society.
Yes.
And I'll use an example from my own personal experience. I visited China a few times in the past 5 years. And went to what they call, I think it's called Forbidden City. It's this huge, I don't know how to explain it. I think 400,000 people live there. It was built during the imperial time, right, of China. But it's preserved, right? And China is a communist state, right? He had Mao. Mao took power in 1949. I mean, the revolution took root in 49.
Correct.
And I'm asking my comrades in China, right? I said, why did you guys keep this? Why didn't you destroy it? Right? Because, I mean, are imperials still alive? I said, yeah, they're still alive. They're walking around, but there is no way they're coming back to the control of China. Well, I said, but you have this forbidden city, and you go there, you are studying history and everything else. I said, yes, it's to remind people of the lives lost to build this, right? No, people died to build the whole state. People were subjugated to inhumane condition to sustain the lives of the emperors, right? The imperial families. But they preserved it so that people can learn history while the society changed.
Correct.
Now, but for us, we're not preserving it. We are actually using it.
Right.
The president of Ghana has no power when it comes to the king of the Ashanti. The king of Ashanti is much more powerful than the president of Ghana. And he's not just the king of Ashanti in Ghana, also in Cote d'Ivoire. So whatever he says in Ghana affects Cote d'Ivoire. And I hope people understand that the Ashantis are all across the region. And that the president of Cote d'Ivoire also has to pledge allegiance. But why are we keeping that? Like this king, I hope I'm not going to be kicked out of Ghana for saying this, right? But in 2023, where people have choices, right? To live, to work. What gives the king power to determine the economic, political, cultural life of Ghanaians? That the king must negotiate with the UK and not the States. That's what Nkrumah had to deal with.
Right.
He's saying we're being attacked by the CIA. And the CIA has some of the leaders on payroll. I mean, we know that the son of the US ambassador at the time of Nkrumah wrote a book. I think it's called JFK Ordeal.
Yes, I haven't read it. I have it.
That book, I think one of the pages, right, clearly states that Dankwa ran off to the US embassy, pissed off that he did not get his monthly check from the CIA. So this is not even hidden, right?
Right.
That in Ghana, we celebrate the big so-called Big Six because of the current president. They are changing the history in Ghana. And they're bringing, they said that Nkrumah wasn't the founder of Ghana. There were 5 other founders, right? So they're making them the Big Six.
Right.
And one of them clearly was a CIA agent.
Right.
And today is being celebrated. You know, those are the challenges that we have in feudalism, that they still control some of the institutions, and those who are our presidents, our elected officials, are still pledging allegiance to them. Right? Even during the elections, you have to go to a chief and give the chief a few things to say, okay, your constituency, please let them vote. And it's becoming a transaction where the people are not even understanding what is it that they are voting for. So it's between the local elite, the petty bourgeoisie, and the feudal lords cutting deals for who's going to lead the state, but making sure that they continue to benefit from what they used to have historically.
Yeah, no, we have serious challenges. As you were speaking, I was reminded of one thing. You're talking about China. What Nyerere once said, he was being interviewed by a journalist. He said, well, sometimes he doesn't understand the West. He says, when they go to these big conferences, they don't want him to bring up issues of imperialism. So he said to the reporter, okay, let's say I never mentioned the word imperialism, but does that mean imperialism is gone? So I thought that even the reporter had to nod and say that was good. And also in Ghana, another one of the memos that I found was one of the presidential advisors saying, and they don't mince words, and that's what's dramatic about it. So as you were talking about, they don't mince words. This memo came to my mind. They wrote that the World Bank had already approved money for the Volta project at the Combo Dam, and they said what they should do is not disperse the funds to Nkrumah's government. And if they follow this strategy, the economy is going to tank, people are going to come out in the streets, and then this would promote the coup in Ghana. Don't miss words. It's black and white. It's in the archives of the State Department. Remarkable. So the other question I wanted to say was that, and this is not more such a question, because I want us to tell us where things, in your view, really stand in some of these African countries. So at the dawn of paper independence, right, we had most of the peasant farmers, right? And they could grow their food in most cases, and they could also earn extra money by growing what they call the cash crops, right? Whether it was cocoa, coffee, tobacco, tea, and they sold it to the marketing boards. And the marketing boards set the domestic price, which was different from what the global price is. And they kept the surplus. So under the colonial regime, some of the money, in fact, was not even returned to the country. In the case of Ghana, some of the money was just hijacked and kept in London and invested on behalf of the UK government. Some kept with the colonial regime in Ghana. So that's pretty much what we had. And then we had, students. We had some factories, right? So we had what you could say urban workers as well. So what do we have, in your view, in a couple of African countries, or most African countries, if you, at the risk of generalizing a little bit? Because, for example, in Uganda, what we had, the peasant farmers, right? But now we have many farmers being kicked off their land because the land is being sold to so-called foreign investors. Some supported by the World Bank funds, some coming from the petrodollar countries. And then we have people being kicked off the land so they can build that oil pipeline with Total Energy of France. So now you're causing more impoverishment. Many of the schools have collapsed. So now you can't even say you have a really strong student movement, right? In Guinea, how did Sékou Touré come up? He was a union leader, right? Which means there was emerging working class. in Guinea, at least at that time.
Mhm.
So now I don't know how to evaluate the structures of society in African countries. So I want you to share maybe some of your thoughts on that, because obviously it's hard to contemplate solution if you don't know what the structures look like today.
Sure.
I mean, continentally, depending on regions, they're a little bit different. I mean, DRC is facing the same challenges as in Uganda, but in West Africa, I'm very hopeful because the union movement is still very strong. And we cannot talk about Mali, Niger, and Burkina without talking about the unions.
Oh, that's good.
For the past 2 decades, at least from what I've, the vantage points and my studies that I have done in there, for the past 2 decades, union leaders and progressive forces, mainly communists and socialists, have organized caravan all across the ECOWAS region. And the caravan has been around very specific objective. One, educating the masses around the French currency, franc CFA. I don't call it an African currency, it's a French currency, right? Explaining them that this is a representation of imperialism in the region. Now, as long as we don't control our currency, and our currency is controlled by France, this is imperialism.
Right.
And two, the second objective was the education of the masses around the presence of foreign military bases in the region.
Yes.
So those two elements, you can't single out one organization and say this is the organization that did it, right? It was a collective effort for 2 decades where when you follow Mali, for example, and you start following the coups that took place, you'll see that the first coup that took place in Mali in the past decade happened the day there was a call for a general strike. The soldiers went to the palace the day of the strike, right? And this strike was called by clerical, by religious leaders, right? the imams,
yes.
right? So, but these imams were organizing around the same narrative of saying our leaders who are controlling us, who are organizing these rigged elections, are the one taking our resources, selling it to giving it pretty much, not even selling it, to the imperialists who are bringing the foreign military bases here, and the insecurity is increasing.
Right.
Since the fall of Gaddafi in Libya.
Yes, which they also were involved in, of course.
Exactly. And then this movement has grown so much. And I'm sure all of us have seen videos of children in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, saying France dégage. That did not happen in 1 year, right? They did that work. But the unions are very strong through the CGT network, right? Be it Burkina, Mali, Niger. And they will organize solidarity strikes in these countries, right? But that network is much more francophone, the francophone African countries in the region. So when the teachers union in Burkina Faso does a strike, the teachers union in Benin also does a strike in solidarity with those in Burkina Faso, and so on. But those who are benefiting from the movement at the moment, right? I'm sure we saw this morning the announcement of Mali, Niger, and Burkina deciding to leave ECOWAS, right?
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, they actually made an announcement today, officially, televised, and also on the president of Niger's Twitter, X page. You'll see that they put the statement. And they made the decision to leave ECOWAS today based on ECOWAS inhumane sanctions against their countries.
Yes.
And they listed a few things, but they mentioned that. So for West Africa, I see that particularly Francophone West Africa, I see that there has been a maturity of the people to not just think about their leaders, to actually think about the system. They understand imperialism much more because of the educational work. They're engaging even in the discussion, right? And I'll end by saying, for example, Niger, I was talking to young Congolese in the DRC. I said, pay attention about what the Nigerians are saying, right? The Nigerians are not saying Bazoum dégage, Bazoum must go.
Mm-hmm.
They are saying France dégage, France must go. Right? So why are they not saying Bazoum must go? So yeah, we took him out in a coup. But French soldiers, you must be out.
Yeah.
But how come we saying Kabila must go?
Right.
But the Israeli soldiers are still in the Congo training the Congolese army.
Right.
Where African intelligence is telling us in October that Israel recalled 200 of the IDF soldiers in DRC to go kill Palestinians pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they training in DRC? Why do they have to go back to go kill our brothers and sisters in Gaza? Right? Right. So those are the things that I see that in West Africa it has matured, that they are able to understand the word imperialism through the grassroots work. And then, of course, in other African countries, and I say like in DRC, they have decimated the unions. Yeah. And this, I think, is true. I don't think it's the single force, but USAID through the 80s started funding through AFL-CIO partnership some of the unions. And the funding of the unions depoliticize many of them. That now they literally pepper unions, that they're just going to conferences.
I'm glad you're pointing this out. Thank you. You know. I'm really glad you're pointing that out. So as you continue to explain it, let me just hone in on it so that you speak about it largely, right? This is the idea of aid, that we all think it's helpful, but it takes away that power to defend politically. Because you are dependent on that aid, or the terms that you agreed to that aid on have now taken away your political power. Please, yes, continue talking about that, but I'm glad you're pointing that out.
We're seeing that now.
Before he says that, let me just make a quick interjection here. That the irony of the aid, also, this neo-colonial dependent regimes that Nkrumah discusses in neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, is also being manifest in a very interesting way in Uganda. It could be one of the things that ultimately brings down this guy. I call him Field Marshal now, Museveni, because he's become so dependent on the West and the World Bank. Last year in August, they suspended all new loans to Uganda because he had signed the anti-LGBTQ law in May, right? And by that time, the country had already been awarded the rights to host the Non-Aligned Movement Summit, which just ended last week. So now you have the cost of hosting that summit, which of course he could not cancel, it would be too embarrassing. And you have this big, because external elements finance almost 50% of the budget. So now you already have a hole in the budget because of the World Bank moving out. Now you have another hole because you have to pay for the expenses of the Non-Aligned Movement Summit. So it's amazing how the same imperialism that sustains you ultimately, as Mark said, you know, they manufacture their own ropes with which they use to hang themselves, right? So go ahead to Sister Nduku's question.
Oh, I mean, the aids, let's look at what's happening even now. Sorry to take it even up to Palestine. I mean, look at what that's happening to the UNRWA. The US has decided to remove.
Yeah. Explain to people who may not be familiar with what that agency is and the impact of removing the money.
They're providing the support. This is the lifeline of the people of Gaza, right?
The humanitarian, right?
Yeah, the humanitarian body. Because, I mean, when we say that Palestine is under apartheid, I don't think people really understand what it means. Nothing comes in and out of Gaza. I mean, even a pen going into Gaza must be controlled by the Israeli, but they're on their land, right? And that UN agency has been the has been seen as the and I don't know if I should say impartial, but the humanitarian organization doing the work of dealing with the symptoms, like the suffering of the Palestinians, providing them with humanitarian support. So it's a critical lifeline for the people of Palestine. The same agency where Blinken, a few weeks ago, was actually lauding and saying that they're doing great work, right? Blinken himself recognized that they are doing great work. And right after the, I guess the indictment, I could call it already now, the provisional indictment.
The one by
ICJ. No, at the ICJ, where Israel has been seen as plausibly
carrying out
genocide, carrying out genocide against the Palestinians. The response of the United States is to withdraw money to the institution providing support to people who are facing genocide.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
And they've done this before, by the way, right? They did it in Rwanda.
Right
before the Rwandan genocide in 1994, the United States lobbied Boutros Ghali and the UN to decrease the numbers of UN soldiers in Rwanda.
Exactly.
And everyone was very aware, right, from the US ambassador in Burundi, that there were tensions, and in his own letter to Paul Kagame, saying that if you don't pay attention, there will be a genocide happening in Rwanda. Information that the US government had. Guess what the US decided to do? Instead of bringing more soldiers to protect the civilians, decrease the soldiers.
Right.
So that's been the modus operandi. I know we went on the tension. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, because they needed that genocide also to form the rationale for Kagame coming from the so-called minority ethnic group seizing power, because then he could say, well, I have to rescue everybody. It's amazing. So Machiavellian. I like what you said in terms of that in these West African countries now, people are not talking about the proxy so-called presidents. They're talking to the source of imperialism itself by addressing France directly. And also on the issue of the ICJ, it's somebody who hails from Uganda. I just want to make sure that I say something.
Oh, your judge is in trouble.
Judge Julia Sebutinde. I tweeted on I don't know if I can find my tweet quickly.
But you mentioned it on Kumbukeni too.
Yes, I tweeted on the 13th of January. And I said in my tweet, I suspected something like this would happen. Okay, so I say Justice Julia Sebutinde from Uganda is one of 15 judges on ICJ. They're elected by UN General Assembly and Security Council and are supposed to be independent. But knowing how corrupt the insufferable, immoral kleptocrat Museveni is, I bet he's trying to sell her vote to the US and Israel. This is my tweet about 12 days before the thing was announced. I sincerely believe that Museveni put pressure on her, because it doesn't have to be direct pressure. All he has to do is have somebody say, Justice, you have relatives in Uganda, right? That's it. Boom.
Oh, how was your check that you received?
Intelligent, rational person would make such an irrational, not only vote, but opposing all the motions, including more aid to Gaza. Does a normal human being do that? No, I don't buy it. So Uganda's now put out a statement saying, oh, we have nothing to do with that. That's not our position. Of course, we would not expect Uganda to put out a statement saying, we are the ones who put pressure on her to vote that way. So that's my own opinion anyway on that issue. But go ahead, Sister Nduku.
I'm glad you pointed her out, because she is part of the bourgeois, right? She is part of the class that is exploiting us in ways that we do not see, that you're revealing in that picture that you just presented, where a nation head that has no right being in that position is putting pressure through the military bourgeois on this judiciary bourgeois. And when she falls down on her face, they're like, we had nothing to do with it.
Exactly. Think about it, Sister Nduku. Who in that position? This is like as a judge, this would be like the pinnacle of your professional career, right? Who would willingly humiliate herself to her peers, right? Number one, and to the entire world like that. To me, it doesn't add up unless you see the handwritings and fingerprints of Museveni in the picture.
But here goes the joke of the whole system, right? And how we keep bringing these cases in front of these systems that are shams, as if we're going to get any rescue. Like, we are a part of the circus, and we are willingly continuing to be a part of the circus. I asked myself when I read that her being thrown under the bus by her fellow, was it the foreign minister who came out to say that?
The permanent representative to the United Nations.
When I saw that, I said to myself, but who of those judges in the ICJ, who of them has any moral ground to be making judgment over what is going on? They haven't even held their own leadership accountable from the countries they come from. They have, she has not held Museveni accountable. The ones representing the US is genociding all over the world. They have never held them accountable.
Actually, to think about that, absolutely, you're right.
Right, and
although in this particular instance, I think it helped put pressure on.
Again, a band-aid, right?
In the bigger picture, you're right. It's all hypocrisy.
Again, a band-aid, because next week, Israel will definitely give them the middle finger and bomb. Maybe even tomorrow. Maybe even they're preparing the bombs right now as we speak. But this is the joke that we continue to be a part of. So let's talk about the petty bourgeoisie. And as I am going through my book and looking at my highlights, I'm calling the petty bourgeoisie the same thing that he called the dishonest intellectuals, Nkrumah, right? The two of them are one and the same thing. I have some names I could name, but I'm going to give grace today, and I will not name the dishonest intellectuals, the fake revolutionaries who take advantage, like you were saying, of the revolution. They join it as if they are part of us. They bark the loudest. And then when everything is said and done, they sit in their capitalist position and continue exploiting in a different form, but the same system, right? And Nkrumah says that the petty bourgeoisie is literally one and the same thing as the imperialist, because the death of imperialism is the death of the petty bourgeoisie. So the two, it's like the hand that feeds you. They cannot get rid of imperialism. So in Africa, we will never really have a true revolution as long as the petty bourgeoisie exists. So let's talk about the petty bourgeoisie. How does Nduku get rid of the petty bourgeoisie in Africa? How are we going to get rid of them? Because they are our problem. First of all, talk about how they are our problem, if you can, and then how are we going? And I saw the answer coming in as you were talking about the unions, right? That's where the answer is. How are we going to get rid of the petty bourgeoisie?
I like the way you
to rephrase the question, as Cabral said, how do we get the bourgeoisie to commit suicide?
Hey.
But she did it already. She was like, how do we get rid of them?
Right.
So, I mean, you did already. So that's why I was saying you're giving the answer.
Authority is not my strong suit, but go on.
In different places, it comes with different means. I'll say by pressing a reset button in the system. We may disagree in some of the approach, but I am really observing what's happening in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Specifically Niger. If you follow the electoral path that Niger took to have Bazoum president, you will know that this was a joke, right? And we are witnessing rigged election after rigged election.
Right.
Exactly.
We are seeing the African presidents, the African Union and its institutions recognizing rigged election and giving people no hope for change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Okay.
I mean, imagine what happened in DRC. We had a presidential election that when you read the press right now, the international press, you will actually think, oh, yeah, there were a few issues, but Tshisekedi won. I will use only one thing. I'm not talking about all the irregularities, right? The ruling regime, the current regime of Felix Tshisekedi and his political parties, the Electoral Commission did agree that there were electoral fraud and that they found voting machines in the houses of people from the party. I'm not talking about any other irregularities, just hear about I'm not talking about 110, right? Because they say 82 of the candidates, they remove them, they're not going to have the seats. But let's just look at that aspect. So if you have an election where people who are running the elections have their own voting machine in their own houses,
right,
voting, and we are calling that an election. The president of the United States, what's his name? Nixon. Why did he resign? Just looking into the results, right? Not owning the voting machine. He was just looking into the result. So that's what happened. But then, you know what happened in DRC the day of the inauguration? 21 presidents were in DRC.
Exactly.
So whenever they do that, right?
Yeah. And Comrade, I think you should also point out that those 21 presidents probably don't dare not go to the inauguration, because imperialism outside would not be pleased if they took a hostile stance. But
exactly, right? So when you see that, and you look at the Congress and say, we keep going from elections to elections, and they keep giving us results that is not reflective of the will of the people.
Absolutely.
And then they look at Niger and say, well, they didn't go through elections, but they're making fundamental changes that's even changing. Niger and Benin are collaborating right now to extract the oil, leaving Niger to go through Benin and the port, right? Guinea is developing bauxite. There is oil, right? The changing of the mining code, the revision of the mining codes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. That could not have happened with those former presidents.
Absolutely not.
So we must not think critically about the instruments of change. We don't dictate that. The people dictate that. The people of West Africa wanted to make sure first that the people understand the forces against them.
Right.
Since they know the external forces, they're saying, we're going to deal with our internal challenges. The most organized force in those countries at the moment is the military.
Right.
They fill that vacuum. But what's giving me hope is that the president, Chani, right, the military leader Chani in Niger, every week is meeting union leaders, religious leaders, civil society members, and it's presented. They are coming back and forth. And I keep asking my comrade in Niger, what about the US military base?
Right.
And they keep telling me, Kambale, you are rushing. One thing at a time. Right? We can't just take everything out. It will be very hard to deal with all the pressure. I said, we know the US is next, right? But we still have to continue to fight. So in terms of how do we get rid of the bourgeoisie, I think we should use the methodology that West Africa has done. One, educate the masses for them to see the bourgeoisie. For them to understand that there are 80,000 people in the stadium at the inauguration that do not represent 15 million people in the city of Kinshasa. Because we have 15 million people. And if you watch the video of the inauguration, the streets were empty. Right? So 80,000 people in the stadium does not represent 15 million people. So you educate them. Why is the cost of living? Why is the Israeli Defense Force training the Republican Guards who literally shoot at protesters in DRC with live bullets, not rubber bullets? They literally shoot with live bullets. So you go into a protest, you don't know if you're going to be alive. How come Tesla can produce an electric vehicle with Congo's cobalt, paying royalties, right? Buying it from Glencore, but Glencore paying royalties to the Israeli businessman named Dan Gertler, who's allegedly uses the billions of dollars he made in the DRC to fund. He has a cement company that provides support to building the wall in Palestine, between Palestine and Israel. Right? So that education, I say, we are not saying. We say Kabila must go. Kabila is gone. Right now, we're saying Tshisekedi must go. Tshisekedi will go. We must tackle the imperial system that exists in the Congo. And that system is what? That's what Kwame Milton said earlier. The Berlin Conference. Right? When they sat down at the Berlin Conference to divide up the African continent, when you read the Act of Berlin, what did they make the Congo be? A so-called free trade zone, right? The Congo Free State. That hasn't changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The resources are changed. So no matter if we have Lumumba, who won the presidential, he won the elections of 1960 and chose prime minister position and gave actually a chief, by the way. Kasavubu was a chief. He was a king, by the way. So he let him have that because he felt that as a prime minister, he will make much more changes than the president, even though he won the elections. From Lumumba to now, we've had different leaders, right? But do we see Congo's copper leave the Congo? Yes. Do we see Congo's cobalt leave? Gold. Our resources continue to leave, just as the ivory and the rubber left in 1885.
Right.
That's what needs to be taught. And then after it's taught, no matter what the instrument that we use, be it electoral process, which I don't think works for our context, be it coup d'etats, right? Whatever mechanism that we use, right? The people will support it if it reflects their interest.
Right.
Yes.
That's what we see in Mali. The reason why the so-called, the way they call them coup leaders, right? These leaders are still in power is because the people of Mali, the people of Burkina, the people of Niger support these leaders and they understand what is at stake in their country. That today, 3 African nations came together to build a new alliance. And if you look at the size of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, it's becoming, I think, the biggest African bloc, right? As a country. If they decide one day to say, well, we don't need 3 leaders, we are going to become the independent state of the alliance of a state of Sahel.
Yeah.
Right.
We are living it. We are not reading it, right? Our children, our grandchildren, and future generations may read about it, but we are witnessing Africans concretely grappling with the ways change happens. And that change is much more concrete and realistic than people will keep going every 5 years to election and expect the results.
So based on what you just said, I think you should then go ahead to answer this question then. Are these phantom elections still needed in these African countries? Because as you're speaking of Congo, I'm thinking of, Uganda. And by the way, for people who haven't seen that documentary, Bobby Wine, the People's President, it's been nominated for the Oscars for documentary film. I think it was on YouTube. I don't know, after, sometimes when they announce
bring tissues
from YouTube. So if it's still on YouTube, I'm suggesting people that are listening to that. But in the case of Uganda, the election was so blatantly rigged. And there were 2 funny things about it. Number one, the guy had turned off the internet, right, Museveni? Meaning you could not transmit the data from I forget the number of polling stations, maybe like more than 30,000 or so. And yet they declared that he had won, right? So Al Jazeera reporter asked the election commission chief, he said, oh, by the way, since you cut off the internet and you cannot transmit any data, how did you come with your results? The guy said, oh, we'll have to get back to you with that. And that was it, man.
The stupidity of exploiters.
Number 2, even the State Department, who always supports this puppet, they put out a statement that's still on their website up today, saying the elections were neither free nor fair. And my question to you is, do you see this as something in a broader context? People are so dissatisfied with these sham elections that more and more will now start supporting. What's going on in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger right now? It's not really new. I think Sankara had already proven. I don't think anybody remembers Sankara as a coup leader. You see, he may have come via coup, but what he did was so tremendous that nobody refers to Sankara as a coup leader. And it seems like these are what these individuals are doing in these countries now. Do you see the possibility of this spreading in other African countries and regions?
I think it is spreading, right? And not every coup is equal, right? All coups are not created equals. I mean, I don't think the coup in Gabon is as revolutionary as what's happening in AES, right? Those three countries we are discussing. But specific for the elections, I don't think that everyone who participates in the electoral process understands the mechanism of elections the way it will represent them. I gave an example that in many parts of DRC, like I'll give you a good example. I received calls today, the MPs, the legislative result came out because there is a Kambale Musavuli who's now an MP. So people thought that it was me right, who was running for
You're
office.
not collecting a big salary.
I'm like, no, I am not the candidate. He happens to have my name. And then I reached out because I have family in the region where he won. It was fascinating. I found that more. But when I reached out, I'm realizing that votes, right, are easily bought.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
A chief can say, all of you vote for this person. So if we have to talk about the electoral process, we can use a Western model of electoral process and say, this is an election.
Right.
It doesn't make sense because the people who are participating in the election don't understand the one man, one vote type system, right? Mm-hmm. They don't understand that you need to read the program more. I mean, the past election, it wasn't around the program of Tshisekedi. It was a xenophobic campaign. It was between, I would say, Moise Katumbi and Felix Tshisekedi.
Right.
And Tshisekedi's team's argument was that Moise Katumbi has dubious origin. He may be Zambian. We want a real Congolese to be president. As a Pan-Africanist, I was very alarmed by the narrative, right? And they ran with that narrative. And some people, I do believe, voted for Tshisekedi for those reasons. So we must rethink the electoral process. Go to the Chinese model. Okay, I'm studying China. That's why I'm thinking about it more.
Right.
Because I'm saying China from 1949 to today, even if we have challenges, right? We say that there are things that they're not doing that we will do. But it's something to study.
Of course.
This is something where even the United Nations is saying they have eradicated extreme poverty. Africans should ask themselves, how did China eradicate extreme poverty? What are the methodologies? So I'm told that the CPC, the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, has 80 million members. And China is 1.4 billion people.
Right.
India has more people than China now, right? But those two countries are in different places, right?
Absolutely.
So how is it that an organized force of 80 million people have established institutions that's helping 1.4 billion people?
Correct. And other countries.
Yeah. And they always tell me when I go there is that not every Chinese is a communist. I see it too. We see it on the African continent. Because when we see Chinese come on the African continent, right? And we see some of the Chinese businessmen, and we are confused about some of the Chinese businesses who are doing bad practices, exploiting the workers and so on. We say, look at communist China. I said, no. In China, you also have capitalists.
Yep.
Right? They are checked. You should ask Jack Ma of Alibaba.
I was about to say Alibaba is capitalism.
Right? So, but he was checked when he became too much. I say, wait a minute. Capital can't just move that way. So as we study other system, and the reason why I brought up there is a question I was asking my comrades there was, they don't have presidential elections, right? The elections take place in the Central Committee of the CPC, and that's how the leaders are elected. And I said, but what would you recommend us on the African continent? I said, but we can't tell you what to do. But what we've known from our experience is that the electoral processes that you are using on the African continent doesn't reflect your reality.
Right.
So you have to study your reality and come up with an electoral process. If you're going to use the word electoral process, as long as it reflects the reality of the people, and I think someone in the comment kind of mentioned it about what Dr. Foucault wrote
I saw that.
about the Mbongi, right? The consensus process of a community where no decision is made until every single community member is chosen. I was in New York coming with you. Remember, I spent some time at what is it called? The Occupy Wall Street.
Right.
Where they're doing consensus for every single thing. And it will last hours. And people are saying, let's move forward. They're deciding about the Nick and Night committee, those who will wrap the cigarette for people. They'll decide about the food distribution, how nobody at Occupy Wall Street was left hungry. Anybody who came to that Zuccotti Park had food. And I was like, oh man, these anarchists, these communists, these socialists are great. I failed to realize Dr. Foucault wrote a book about the Congo Kingdom within the society had a process called Mbongi where the community themselves, right, decided the future of the community based on issues that existed. So we take elements that are constructive from our culture to build a new society that we want. Because if we keep thinking that we're going to go vote, I mean, ask Rwandans. They're telling the world that they've been voting Kagame at 93%.
Yep.
And I'm glad you're saying this. It goes to a conversation we had on the Imagine Al-Kelbulan. So I am also a co-host on the Imagine Al-Kelbulan. You can find them, and they are in the audience for those of you who want to know how to write that. But we had a conversation on Friday with Mama Kanyisile. I call her Mama because she's my elder, but her name is Dr. Kanyisile. And she was talking about African spirituality. But she said that African language is the vehicle for African culture. African culture is the vehicle for African spirituality. All three together are the full African being. We're going back to Mbongi, right? And us studying our culture, going back without colonized minds to study our culture and figure out ways that work for us. This goes back to the concept of Ubuntu as well, which came up in that conversation. But we have to stop using the Western model. It must stop. I don't care how fancy you think Nike looks like, how great Gucci looks on you, how nice your bleaching lotion smells and makes you look. We've got to stop. And we've got to stop also this thing of accommodating the bourgeois who want to keep that system going, which is why I did this, right? That can be interpreted in many ways. I'm not going to make any apologies. We're talking about African lives here. You interpret it the way you want to. That's okay. Call me whatever you want to. That's okay. But the point is, I agree with you. The solution is in us. And Nkrumah talks about people like us, right? People who came up from humble backgrounds, they get a taste of what being a bourgeois is, right? The elite. You get that education, you're invited in those spaces, you get the good jobs, you're paid well, but you remember where you came from. And because some of your people are still where you came from, you now are a true revolutionary. You're like, no, this thing is exploiting my people. I can no longer be a part of it. So you go back to the movement. I agree that we who have gone back to the masses, to helping our people, forget about these terms, European terms, masses, we who have gone back to the African way of thinking of the community's well-being first before our own personal interests. We must start educating locally. We must start, those of us in the diaspora, connecting with those on the continent. And as I say this is me talking in many directions, but saying the same, like, just follow me. YALF, the Young African Leaders Forum, again, in the chat for those of you who are looking for the spelling, are going to be starting a podcast. I'm asking every single member of Kumbukeni who has subscribed to Kumbukeni to go and subscribe to that channel. That will be an African channel on YouTube talking about African issues by Africans that is going to start next week. So this is what we're talking about. With that channel that is airing in Nigeria, in Botswana, in Tanzania, with representatives on the ground, we have a better chance of doing what the unions did in those West African countries. So we as Africans in the diaspora, we might sit there and say, Africa is not my problem. But Brother Musavuli just showed Africa is our problem, all of our problems, right? You showed the US mess in Palestine. You showed the resources coming from Congo, the company in the US giving the profits to the man in Israel who's building the wall in Palestine. So it's all tied in. So we must support those African groups, those African unions, those African organizations that are doing the real work. As I say, we must support them, Brother Musavuli, before we go to the questions in the audience. What are you doing? How can the community support you? Yes, please.
So I've been based in Accra, Ghana, working under the political direction of the Socialist Movement of Ghana. They are my host there. And with the work that I'm doing also on the African continent, I focus on two things. One is the support of the Pan-Africanism Today network. It's a secretariat out of Johannesburg. And they've been creating a platform, bringing organization without actually telling each organization what to do, right? They're creating a platform where organizations can engage and get to know each other. And they've been doing that since 2016. So I've been helping them, on the West African front. And then, of course, I'm hoping that there is the West African People's Organization that was launched in Ghana, bringing West African Progressive Organization. They even have a website, WAPO, that's how they call it. I think the website is West African People's Organization.
I'll pull it up.
Yeah. So that's been bringing progressive forces there. The second thing that I'm doing also in Ghana is something I'm passionate about. I have some IT experience, tech experience. And with that tech experience, I became alarmed when I decided to move on the continent about cybersecurity. People are not sensitive to cybersecurity at all on the African continent. I mean, I saw viruses that I literally have not seen since 2005.
Wow.
Right? Viruses like that will pretty much change files on your flash drive, right? And change file names. I have not had that virus since 2005, but in 2023, it is still circulating. So we've been doing a few like ICT training for people, for organizations, for institutions, and we just help people who need it. Mostly, I work with progressive organizations, and it's been word of mouth. It's not something we're broadcasting. That I feel that today, for any revolutionary organization, they should have an IT policy that reflects the reality of the world today. You should not be sending sensitive information on WhatsApp.
Talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, we know that there are many more, right? But we know two Israeli companies, NSO and Black Cube, who provide African governments with tools to spy on the citizen, right? NSO made the Pegasus, right? Pegasus, whenever your phone is infected, literally, they see everything on your phone, right? And people get that usually through WhatsApp message and WhatsApp forward. So we teach people about what is a phishing email, phishing message, how do you check a link before you open, instead of just clicking on anything. No, you're not gonna become a billionaire because someone send you an image or play this game or something.
Here's the deal, Brother Musavuli. Here's the deal. You're coming back to talk about cybersecurity.
Yeah, we need to.
Yes.
Cybersecurity for the African community, right? Yes. Even if we decide you're coming back next week for that, you're coming back. Yes. And speaking of coming back, and you can but did you finish your submission on how we can help you?
And the last one is, I've worked with Friends of the Congo for over a decade. It's an organization that still supports it today. They've provided the best analysis on the situation in the Congo. And they also support an institution in the DRC called the André Blouin Cultural Center. The André Blouin Cultural Center in Kinshasa train young Congolese, provide cultural activities, but the name should also hint at what, who is André Blouin, right? André Blouin was Patrice Lumumba's chief of protocol, right? It's like chief of staff, literally, a powerful woman. She wrote the Independence Day speech of the Congo. So when people say, "Oh man,"
the one that made the Belgian king upset, or that one?
That's actually what the Belgians want us to believe. They were upset before the speech. The reason I say this is, if he was upset that day, it only took 2 days for the secession to happen. That takes organization. They don't organize soldiers in Katanga all of a sudden.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes. Yeah. Very good.
So it was an excuse, right? He made that speech. That's why.
I don't think anybody's ever put it that way. Thank you.
Yeah. So by supporting financially, intellectually, with materials, Friends of the Congo, and noting that the support is also going to institutions in DRC, particularly the André Blouin Center, that will be a huge help for the work that we are doing in DRC as well. And of course, I am from Congo. I don't see myself only as a Congolese. I see myself as a Pan-African. That's why also I'm based in Ghana now, and I'm learning as much. I'm very, very humbled and thankful to the Ghanaians for everything they have taught me for the past 5 years. They've been very, very helpful. I met Kwame Nkrumah's secretary before he passed away, and it was very moving to meet him. And he kept saying, "The Congo, Nkrumah, love the Congo." Unfortunately, he was on his deathbed, but everyone in Ghana, they still have that Congo connection. They always remind me of that, especially the Nkrumah in Accra. I said, no, there is a reason why Kwame Nkrumah put Congo as part of the United States of Africa, and that spirit still is vibrant in Ghana. So I'm thankful for that.
With Kinshasa as the capital.
Yeah. While you're in Ghana, please find Abibi to me, and I will communicate with you outside of this. Do you know about them?
No.
Yes, I will guide you to them, because I think you could support the work that they're doing there. It could be an African relationship, right? Which is Ubuntu. It's cyclical. Here goes this observation. You should do a series by Dead and 19, Asante Sana, Dead and 19. You should do a series on capitalism versus socialism and traditional African alternatives like Fukiao's Mbongi. You're coming back for that as well.
Yes.
Brother. I'm just letting you know right now.
Not just Fukiao, there is also Dr. Sophie Kanza. She wrote a fantastic book. She's the first Congolese woman PhD in our history. She did a PhD at Harvard, and guess who helped her get her PhD in terms of her source? Dr. Fukiao. She even put it in the front of the book. And she studied Congo's development from 1490 to the Second Republic of Mobutu in 1965.
Interesting.
So we can use both their books, given that they are mentor-mentee relationship, for this conversation. That would be great. Yeah. Let me look for another one. Allimadi, you have anything? I hear you clearing your throat as I get another question.
There was a question on China that I wanted to address. I think the person did not understand what I said. I never said that. Yeah, China did not eradicate poverty. I said that China eradicated extreme poverty.
Right.
According to
there's a big distinction there. Right.
Exactly. And the poverty, the internationally agreed upon poverty line is $1.90. No one in China makes less than $1.90 a day.
How much?
$1.9. No one in China makes less than $1.9 a day.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be even debating whether China has achieved much or not, because everything has to be compared with where China was before.
Yes, yeah.
Even if you go by the World Bank data, and anybody can Google it right now, in 1960, China's per capita income was $90. Ghana's was $189. Just think about that. And that's within literally just a few generations. Today, of course, China is maybe what, 16, 17,000. Ghana is about 2,500, which is still relatively, quote unquote, good compared to other African countries, where per capita, for example, in Uganda, I think is $800, So Ghana, 3 times Uganda's, but China's, several multiples higher than Ghana. So we can't diminish the achievement. And look at it. African countries collectively import $35 billion worth of food every year from outside Africa. Think about how much that resources could do to African healthcare systems, African education systems, and
Or
even
just
the
as
agriculture
subsidies.
industry in Africa.
As subsidies to the
Difficult
farmers.
if you're being kicked off your land,
Yeah. Here goes this. Getla has been building new settlements infrastructure. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, Gertler is not spoken a lot, especially with the current situation. We've what has been really nice, right? That is that, I don't know if I should say nice. What I've noticed, which is really heartwarming, is as people advocate for the liberation of the Palestinian people, they have called also on the liberation of the people of Sudan and the Congo.
The Congo.
It's been quite fascinating to watch. So what I've been trying to help people understand is these issues are really connected, even economically, right? It's not a theoretical thing. We have IDF soldiers in DRC. We have an Israeli businessman. I mean, it's not just his building settlement. You know who his lawyer is? One of his lawyers, two of his lawyers, one of them was the former FBI director, and the other one was Donald Trump's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz has been implicated with, what's his name? Heinstein?
Conflict of interest written all over it.
Wait, excuse me. Let's not forget to mention that Dershowitz name appears on the list of those friends.
Hamstein.
Friends of that guy. What was his name?
Hamstein.
Yes, who was procuring underage
children
to be victimized by people, prominent people, including Prince Charles' brother. What's his name? The one whose name Andrew, right?
Yeah.
Dershowitz's name appears on the list. So Dershowitz, it's amazing how he still gets to speak to prominent media outlets, with his reputation. But go ahead, brother.
Yeah, but Dershowitz was able to get Donald Trump to remove the sanctions against Gertler. He was the lawyer representing Dan Gertler in the U.S. because he's under U.S. sanctions for the dealings in DRC of $1.3 billion. But those things are not measured. So I always make a point to bring up these names because
very good.
People just talk about this like he has no connection to the African continent. He has no connection to the DRC. I say, yes. Where do they make their money? I mean, Bloomberg, where did he make his money? Bloomberg,
Talk about that, please. Don't just ask that question. Talk about where he made the money.
Bloomberg was selling diamonds for Mobutu in New York. He was the middleman. It's not, people talk about Bloomberg's just selling the box.
Right, that Bloomberg machine.
That's not where he made his money. I mean, he didn't make money with that, but he had close ties to Mobutu and was the middleman for Mobutu for selling resources in New York City. And most people who deal with diamond, they know about New York City, where you go take your diamond and sell it. Before coming to New York City, I didn't know these things until I was there. I said,
imagine that.
It's a neighborhood.
A Congolese child finally finding the resources he left home in New York City, valued at a higher price.
And
But-
pointing and saying, "Wait, that's mine," and everybody saying, "You're
I
crazy."
know. Everyone is looking at you. You're a refugee. What you talking
Look
about?
at this crazy African.
I mean, I will add to there is a Congolese elder. He's helped me a lot, Dr. Lubangi Munyanya. He's in New Jersey, and about him.
Yeah, I've met the brother.
Yes. So about 3 weeks ago, I called him because he's also mentored me a lot, and I called him because I freaked out. When he was mentoring me, he would share with me things where I'll say, this Congolese elder is just making up things. He's saying things out of the blue, It sounds so esoteric. But I had a eureka moment 3 weeks ago where something he told me, I literally had the evidence, right? He shared with me the story of how the Belgians raped the Congolese women in the Kasai region. That's why in the Kasai region, you have a lot of people with light skin, right? And there is a traditional song in the Congo that speaks about a woman named Kapinga, right? So when in the Kasai region, you give the girl the name Kapinga, it means that she's light skinned. But what is not taught is how did they become light skinned through colonization?
Right.
So he shared with me, I said, this guy is just coming out of these traditional songs. And in Tervuren, the Royal Museum in Belgium, actually has a link exactly explaining these facts.
Wow.
And I sent him the link. I called him. I said, I really want to apologize. And he didn't know what I was talking about. So, but what you've been telling me after 10 years, I'm seeing that, evidence. Yeah, you're not actually making up things. I said, but you thought I was just sharing with you things without like information. I said, we are Congolese. They're writing about us, right? My mother, my grandmother, they saw the colonials come. So we don't need to read the book, right? They told us when they came to our territory, how do we fight them? Why they hate Lumumba? Lumumba wearing the Leopold hat was before Mobutu, and there is a reason why, right? These were the warriors who fought the Belgians, and they did everything in their power to put in the document that Congolese were cannibals. Yeah. And if you look at the New York Times in 1960, they wrote articles about Lumumba being a cannibal.
Yeah.
No evidence of that, but he explained it where it come from, because they needed to create an image of a savage Congolese, of a savage colonial man, and they've kept that history there, So those things that sometimes sounds unrealistic, like they sell diamonds in New York City coming from the African continent, and all these stories, these are real things that people should lift up. And of course, I don't say provide evidence, but make sure that our people know the challenges that we face.
Right. And we thank you for bringing all this knowledge to our weekly guest on Kumbukeni.
Yes. And it goes back to Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, right? Just follow the trail of those companies, because they are all attached, and you will probably find this Israeli man attached to one of the ones named there. So thank you so much. There is so much. I actually, Milton Allimadi had to remind me to go to the comments to look at them, because I am so engaged in what you're saying. I want you to keep talking. Like, can we have this for another 5 hours? Is everyone okay? Hands up. Can we continue talking?
We will definitely have you again, comrade.
Yes. And on a side lighter note, Allimadi, quickly, they're asking, are you from North Carolina A&T?
I give pride.
There you go. There you go.
Yes. I am from. I went to this school. Helped me. Not just the school. I'll be very precise. The Black History Club at North Carolina A&T State campus is the institution or the organization that really helped me understand who I am.
Excellent.
Very humbling experience. I mean, imagine, right? I'm Congolese. I'm coming there and I'm not using my real African name, right? I'm using a nickname.
Right.
So I meet a young African-American brother. I said, what's your name? Oh, my name is G. I said, no, G. No, that's not your name. What's your African name? And I'm looking at him confused. I said, wait a minute. And he's carrying the red, black, and green flag on campus.
Excellent.
Right? And then I said, my name is Kambale. He looked at me and said, that's a beautiful name. You should be telling people your name is Kambale. His name is Amari, by the way. He's the one who got me to start thinking.
Right.
And then he started uniting us. We organized the Organizational Africa Unity on campus. You know what is our OAU? It was the African Student Association, the Black Student Union, and a few other African American organizations. We all came together as a Black, and our mission was, if I do an event, they come. If they do an event, we come. And we start learning about each other until where they lifted up the story of the Congo on campus.
Nice.
And then I learned more about the city of Greensboro, right? The student at ANT, the ANT4, who went February 1st, 1961, downtown Greensboro, and started the sitting movement, demanding to be served, because at the time, blacks could not eat in the same restaurant as whites.
Right.
But and you notice in history, if you Google them, they call them Greensboro 4. At ANT, we don't call them Greensboro 4. We call them ANT4. Because there was only one person in that group who was from Greensboro. They were not from Greensboro. They were from ANT. And students at ANT have always been radical in the city. They are the students who had the standoff with the National Guard on campus. Why did the National Guard have a standoff with the student at ANT? Because a racist police officer in Greensboro came on campus and shot a student, Willie Grimes, in the back of his head on campus. And the student rose up. They had weapons in the dorms, and they had, I think, over a month, like standoff. The city had to call the National Guard to stop the student. And there is actually a memorial on campus of Willie Grimes, right? And there is so much. But the Black History Club have been the organization within the students' organization. I mean, even advocating for Swahili to be taught at ANT. Can you imagine that we had to fight to have Swahili at ANT, but they were teaching Japanese, German, Spanish, and no African language, right? And the school say we cannot have it because the students are not interested. And we mobilized on campus, and we got 12, I think probably 10, to be conservative, 10,000 students, or less, right? We signed a petition that we took to the chancellor. I said, the student wants Swahili on campus. You know what was the excuse after we got the signature? We don't have funding for it. First was, students are not interested.
Right, now we don't have money.
Yeah, right? But Spanish is taught, German is taught, Japanese is taught,
right?
But Swahili is not. But the Black History Club has always taken on progressive actions. So they helped me, and I love my ANT experience, and I always lift up their story because they really helped me understand who I was as an African, being in the Americas, in the African community of the diaspora, where they embraced me for who I was.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful story. It reminds me of Fela and how Fela connected to his African consciousness by his interaction in the United States as well.
Mine too. Me. That's like, and you know
I think we could speak all day, but I'm going
let me
another meeting shortly.
All right. Allimadi, before you go, that is another topic. And as you were talking, I saw two topics, right? The importance of Black studies in the revolution.
Definitely.
Black Africana studies, right? We need to talk about that because as you talk about the struggle to get Kiswahili taught, as we talk about Mama Kanyisile saying language, African language is the vehicle for culture, culture is the vehicle for spirituality, all three is the African being. We must understand the importance of Black studies and Africana studies, right?
Without a doubt.
In those departments, I was at an event last year, towards the end of the year, with a bunch of those departments from different universities in New Jersey, where they were talking about the struggle. They're not even recognized as departments. They are courses, and they have to fight to be recognized as departments. Yeah. And they have to fight to maintain the departments and to get funding. So that's another topic you must come back for. Clearly, you're going to be a regular on Kumbukeni, and we thank you for sharing your knowledge. Allimadi, any closing words?
Oh, no, I think this has been another educational and informative session. So karibu sana. We know you have a young boy there, Junior, and we're glad that he's not interrupted. And we send our well wishes to Junior as well.
Yeah.
One day we'll be on. That's our hope, that he found his way and then he shares the African story wherever as he grows up.
Yes. You have any last words other than the hope for your son to find the African story?
No, I think I'll be redundant. I'm very humbled, thankful that you organized this. I'm looking forward to engage more. I want to learn from everyone. I don't think I know everything. I'm sharing my experience and my little knowledge. But our exchange has opened my eyes to even other things that I didn't think about. So I thank you for that. And please continue. It's important to have African voices in this space.
Thank you. And for those of you, speaking of Kiswahili, who are interested in taking Kiswahili, we have our course that is starting next week on Saturday at 11 a.m. I just put the registration form link in there. Sign up. It is $20. Sign up and join us, and we'll teach you how to speak Kiswahili. Asanteni, siku njema, kwaherini. Thank you all. Thank you, Brother Musavuli.